Good morning. This is the Bob Unger Show, and we're very privileged today to have a very bright American, which today is almost a oxymoron. And it's unusual, which is what I always try to bring to you, unusual people who go against the grain and go after the truth, no matter what, as long as the truth is important. I mean, you don't have to tell a woman she's ugly if she is, because that's not an important truth. But when you're talking about existential issues, as we're going to speak about today with Leigh Dundas, um, these things, you cannot get away from the truth. And you just got to go right there, good and hard, whether the people like it or not. And you force them to get off that Egyptian river denial. And some people will not face it no matter what, but I'm going to keep putting it in their face. And that's what Leigh does in her book, Just Stand Up. And ironically, as I just told Leigh before we started, I saw the film last night, Sound of Freedom. And all the reviewers are ganging up on the movie and saying it's conspiracy theory. I'm waiting for the white supremacy. That'll come too, even though they were rescuing Hispanic kids. But they'll call that white supremacy also, because they call everything white supremacy. And Leigh is an expert. In addition to being an attorney, it's more impressive what she's done to help kids, because kids are being victimized all over the world. So Leigh, give us a little bit about your background. Were you always a truth seeker, or did you have some kind of an epiphany that led you to where you are? Give us a little bit of that process.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me today. In this era of censorship, the antidote is platforms like yours that spell out the truth and make it available to the masses. So it's always an honor to be with like-minded folk who are doing good work. I had a fairly normal upbringing in many respects, although a little bit abnormal. I had one great parent and one parent who was not so great. And I discovered early that turning the other cheek, so to speak, oftentimes just ended with two bruised cheeks. So I wasn't ever a fan to staying quiet in the face of injustice or wrongdoing, and I didn't see that it ended well. It doesn't always end well to stand up. But from the perspective of at least you can sleep knowing that you've done the right thing, it always ends well because you know you've made the right decision, regardless of what the outcome itself was, separate from your decision. So I would say fairly early on, I was wired to speak my mind and stand up, even when probably most folks that age were not doing that. And I like to read. I wouldn't say I'm a math whiz by any means, but I was pretty good at the reading and writing aspect. And sailed through school, loved school. It was a place that was calm and where I could excel and where there wasn't a lot of chaos and craziness. So I looked at school as sort of a haven, and I got an offer when I was in 8th grade to come and take a test. And if I scored high enough on the test, I was allowed to start college. And I went and I took the test and I started college at the age of 14. And it wasn't like a separate campus for bright kids where we were all segregated. It was a handful of kids, 10 or 20 kids, and we were just thrown into the college campus, and nobody really knew how old you were unless you told them. And it was great. I found that college professors treated you as an equal. They expected that you would do the work. And it was an amazing experience. And I ate it up. And then I got bored, I would say, in my junior year, and I decided to take 32 units, one quarter in one 10-week quarter, which is for people who have not gone to college, that's a year's worth of credit in 2.5 months. And that was a little challenging, even for me, but I got done. And my mom laughingly said, "Well, good job, babe, but now you're out of school a year earlier, and what are you going to do? Go get a job." So I, like every good 17-year-old who doesn't have a plan, I went and started working in the restaurant industry and applied to law school. And I was 17 at the time, and I got into most of the law schools I applied to, which was shocking. I didn't know if they were going to love me or hate me because of the young age. And then off I went to law school, and I passed the state bar right around the time I was able to legally enter a bar, and have a drink, which was handy. And I went to work at some white shoe law firms that were representing large Fortune 500 companies. And that was going along swimmingly, except for the fact that I was bored off my arse. And I just felt like I was shoveling money from one big corporate, Leviathan to another. And but it was good training. And I wouldn't, as I mentioned before the show, when you and I were chit-chatting, Bob, I wouldn't take it back for love or money. So I did that for a few years. Then I had a kid, did the mom thing, helped my husband with his business. And in 2013, about 10 years ago, we sold that business, and we had a little bit of time and a little bit of money all, at the same time, which is rare. As small business owners, you usually have time but no money, or money but no time. And we decided we were going to yank my daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, out of school and travel. And we went to Australia. We spent some time, a couple months there, New Zealand, and then we ended up in Southeast Asia. But basically, within 3 days of landing in Sydney, Australia, I was again bored off my behind. And I started reaching out to anti-sex slavery nonprofits who were operating in Australasia. And the response was uniformly disinterested, and that would be a generous response. They were like, wait, you're a soccer mom who's white and wants to do good from Orange County, and you're here for a little while. Click, click, slam door, slam door. But I'm persistent.
What
That's
brought you
one of
to
my.
an interest in that subject?
I'd always been interested in that topic. And before I went to work at the large law firm, my third year of law school, I interned at the DA's office in LA County. And I loved it because you were always in court on your feet. Even though we were students, we were allowed to argue cases before juries, which I did. And I worked there with a sex crimes prosecutor. And I was fascinated by the work. I'd always been fascinated by power imbalances, sexual violence, rape, disenfranchised, marginalized populations, child abuse. I was a sociology major. Well, I was briefly a music major, but then I decided I didn't want to marry the piano. So I switched to sociology. I think at the time it was an attempt to make sense of the world I had grown up in. I thought, oh, there's a body of technology that explains the crazy I grew up with, and maybe I should avail myself of that in the hopes of not repeating generational patterns. But like many people who didn't have idyllic childhoods, I wanted to understand it. And so I'd always had an interest in those topics, and I got a job offer from the DA's office. The head of the office, as I was leaving my internship and getting ready to graduate, said, you would make a hell of a prosecutor, especially a sex crimes prosecutor. You should come back to us. And I said, well, with all due respect, you're paying poverty line wages, and I have 6 digits of tuition to pay off, and an offer from the best firm in town, multiple offers. And I'm going to go there, and maybe I'll come back after I paid off the debt. And I'll never forget, the guy looked at me and he started smiling as I started giving him my song and dance. And he said, okay. And I talk about it in my book. And I knew at the time that I was making a mistake because I loved being at the DA's office. The time would just fly by. I'd get there at 8. I'd look up at the clock thinking maybe an hour or two had passed, and it was 5 or 6 at night. I mean, that was how engaged and entrenched and passionately involved I was in the work. And it was all debate. You were in court all the time. It was adrenaline. You were on your feet. You were arguing, and that was what I was good at. And I knew it. And I knew I was making a mistake as I did it. And I said, maybe I'll come back. And he said, okay. And I'm sure he'd had a million people say that to him. And I went to the big firm and I got golden handcuffs on. You're getting paid top dollar. You're getting to work with the brightest people in the world, the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who are rolling out the newest thingamajigger, or technology. And you should be excited because it looks great on paper. But I remember the first day at that law firm, I had just gotten done skydiving the week before in New Zealand. I came home from my post-bar exam trip, walked into the office in Newport Beach, looked up thinking, surely it's time to go home. And there was a big giant clock on the wall, and it had been like 56 minutes. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not even lunchtime yet. And that was when I knew I had made a mistake. And my mother said, good old, she's Hungarian, but they're like Jewish mothers, even if they're, even if they're only Hungarian Romanian. And she's like, you don't want to be a job hopper. Like, do not be a job hopper. That looks bad on your resume. Don't do what your dad did. You stay there. You learn something. And I was like, oh no. So I stayed. I stayed at that firm for 6 years, which felt like 60 years. But like I said, it was a good experience. But when we were packing up my husband's office, I was scooping up all the magazines. He's a chiropractor. He had an MD chiropractic holistic wellness office in Orange County. And we had magazines in the front office for the patients, like any doctor's office does. And I had scooped up a red book, and it had fallen open to an article about women who had been sex trafficked or were working in the industry. And there were 3 profiled women, and one of them was a woman from the Central Valley here in California who had been trafficked at the age of 12 and then gone on to get her JD and MBA from UCLA or USC. And in her final year, one of the guys she was friendly with in the film grad school, who was the film major or whatever, needed to do for his final project a documentary, and he wanted to do something like Taxi and then interview a child sex slave or a child prostitute. But he was talking to her one day over coffee. He's like, well, I don't know where I'm going to find somebody to interview. And she had kept her past completely, hush hush. And she looked at him and she said, well, I suppose you could interview me. And he was like, what are you talking about? You're like about to graduate law school with your MBA. And she's like, well, when I was 12, I was trafficked for a period of time in Fresno or wherever she'd grown up. Her name's Carissa Phelps, by the way. She does amazing work here in California. And he made a film short that was called Runaway Girl. And she changed directions after she graduated, started an NGO that was dedicated to training law enforcement officers on how to actually arrest not the victims, not the child sex slave, but the pimps and the buyers instead of arresting the child prostitute, right? And she was being profiled by Redbook. So I read this article on her as I'm trying to get my husband's office cleaned out and ready to be sold and transferred over. And I thought, well, I'll be darned. I've always wanted to do that work since I told the DA's office no. I'm going to Google her and see if I can find a phone number. And I sat down and I Googled her, and a phone number popped up. And I called it. And I thought, well, I'm never going to get a hold of her. And she answered on the second ring. It was her actual cell phone number. And she said, well, I'm in LA for the day. You want to come down and get coffee tomorrow at LAX airport before I fly out? And I said, heck yeah. So I met her for coffee, and she said, you told them once 20 years ago. How about now? Is now your time to do this work? Let's hook up when you get back from Southeast Asia and Australia. So that was the seed that was planted. And then I went to Australia and I got bored because I'd never not worked a day in my life. My daughter's in school, my husband's busy. So I just started reaching out to all these sex slave nonprofits that were rescuing women who were in the life. And I finally got a bite from a US based sex trafficking nonprofit. And we met for the first time in Da Nang, Vietnam. They invited me to a meeting they were taking with the Vietnamese government about sex trafficking in that region. And we flew out of New Zealand with my 8-year-old and my husband in tow. And I went to this meeting and I fell in love with the work all over again. And they said, well, what are you doing for the rest of your time in Southeast Asia? And I said, well, with your permission and blessing, I'll spend time seeing the sites with my kids, and the rest of the time I'll work for you unpaid. And I came home with a job as their general counsel.
I see. Now, how different is it in the United States, if at all, from what you're talking about in Asia and what the movie Sound of Freedom talks about, which is mostly Latin American kids? How prevalent is this in the United States with regard to child brothels? And what is the general process that occurs when a kid is taken and put into that life? How does that happen? Because I'm always very aware with my grandkid about this whole thing. I keep an eye on him every second.
As you should.
And I understand how quickly a child can be taken.
Yeah.
So what is that process? How prevalent is it? And some of the things that I'm reading about America and the government and Hollywood and Pizzagate, how prevalent is it? Is it just rumors? You know, as lawyers, we need evidence. I have a visceral, spiritual feeling about these things,
Hmm.
and I know evil when I feel it, but I still need tangible evidence and facts.
Yep. Um, all of those are good questions. Just to give folks a sort of scope worldwide, what we're looking at right now is human trafficking in all of its forms, whether it's sex slavery or forced labor, men who are forced to work on a shrimping boat in the South Asian seas, or, you know, in a mine in Africa, making the metal that goes into our, you know, cell phones and our Tesla batteries, or makes our chocolate or our t-shirts. Regardless of the type of trafficking, if you aggregate it all together, you're looking at the second largest criminal economy on the face of the planet, soon to overtake drugs for the top spot, for the simple reason that there's a lot more profit in selling a 7-year-old to a sex buyer than there is in selling cocaine to an addict. If you come to me tonight, hypothetically, because I know you're not a cocaine addict and I'm certainly not a dealer, but just to make it really real for your audience, if you come to me and say, "Hey, I want to buy some blow from you, and I'm a dealer and I sell you some cocaine tonight," and you like it, and you come back to me tomorrow night, in the intervening 24-hour period, I have had to portion off some piece of the $100 or whatever it is you gave me tonight and go resupply my cocaine stash so that I can sell you more tomorrow, because it is an expendable product. So if you give me $100, I may be spending, I don't know what the breakdown is, but maybe $30 or $50 to resupply, right? It's not all profit. Half of it's going to my hard costs. The issue is very different if you sell a child to a pedophile. If I sell a 7-year-old to a pedophile tonight and that guy likes it, and he comes back to me and goes, "I enjoyed myself last night. I want more of that tonight." In the intervening time, I have not had to go buy another 7-year-old to sell this guy another 7-year-old the next night. I am essentially renting that same girl over and over and over again until she dies. My only hard cost is the half a cup of rice a day, or the Happy Meal once a day, that it costs me to feed the child to keep him alive. And if I'm in America, because we don't really have brothels in America or red light districts anymore, the, you know, 60 or 40 or whatever dollars it is to buy a Motel 6 room and cram 8 or 10 girls into a room every night and babysit them while I'm sending them on calls. So it is almost a pure profit transaction. You know, out of $100, you're actually keeping 90, 95, $97. And every small time gangbanger from Compton and Watts in LA out here, all the way up to the big Japanese mafias like the Yakuza and the Asian mafias, have figured out that you are making money hand over fist when you're selling kids for sex versus cocaine to addicts or illegal weapons to, you know, Mideastern regimes. So they have moved away from trafficking sawed-off shotguns and bombs and cocaine and heroin, and moved in to trafficking people. And that is why the crime is growing. That is why it is the fastest growing crime. And that is why it'll be the top criminal economy inside the next 10 years. $150 billion a year industry is what we're looking at right now. 40 million people with an M are currently enslaved. Again, to give your audience a frame of reference, that is like waking up and having every single person in California, we have 40 million people about in California right now, having them all be chained to a bed or forced to work in a mine until they die. The average age at which girls are turned out in America is 12. Boys a little bit younger in many jurisdictions, it's closer to 11. And according to the FBI, about 10 years ago, they published some statistics indicating that the average life expectancy once a child was turned out in the sex trade was about 7 years, 8 years. So what you're seeing, if you add 7 years to 12, you rapidly realize these kids are dead or dying in the US by the time they can legally vote. In Asia, where I work, the situation is actually worse. The girls are turned out much younger. There is no bottom age limit. You have kids who are 2, 3, 4, babies, 6, 7 on up being sex trafficked. The one-child policy in China created a perfect storm for sex traffickers, because you get these Chinese couples who give birth to a girl and nobody wants a girl in Asia. If you can only have one kid, you want it to be a boy. And so they go down to the southern border of China, where there is a black market, and all the Cambodian and Thai brothels who sit right below China, right there, geographically proximal, will say, oh, you don't want your baby girl, so you can get rid of it and say the baby died at childbirth and try again for a boy to carry on the family name because you can only have one child in China. That's fine. We'll pay you for that baby girl and we'll put her in a Cambodian brothel. And we'll tell the dentist from Chicago that he can cure his AIDS if he has sex with a virgin, and we can guarantee he's getting a virgin because he's getting a 3-month-old to rape. And that is the perfect storm you see, where Chinese couples are looking to offload their baby girls so they can try again. And the brothels are like, yeah, give me your girls, because that's by and large what the pedophiles want who come to those countries. The difference, to answer your final question, between the brothels in America, which are the Travelodge Super 8 Motel 6 rooms, or even high-end, Ritz-Carlton rooms for your escorts and whatnot, and the brothels in Asia, is the level of overt display of the wares, if you will. In America, you want to buy a 7-year-old for sex or a 3-month-old for sex. That takes some doing. You need to know people. You need to be going underground. You're going to be vetted. They're going to be worried that it's a setup. And you're going to have to really, really struggle to get what you like as a pedophile. You want a 14-year-old girl? Yeah, you can find that going down to Beach Boulevard off of Disneyland, or, answering a Craigslist ad or something like that. But if you want truly young girls in America, or boys, it's harder to find. In Asia, it is on display. You walk into a bar or a hotel in the areas that I work in Thailand and Cambodia, and you order from the menu. There'll be a menu, and you go, yeah, I'll take a burger and I'll take that kind of beer and I'll take number 13. And the mama-san will bring you your burger and your beer, and maybe you sing a little karaoke. And then when you're all done and you've paid your couple bucks for that, you go in a back room with whatever number you decided you wanted and do your business. And there is no enforcement in many of these areas. There's no law enforcement. The brothels are just out in the open. There's a town we work in. I do a lot of work in the deep south of Thailand, right along the Malaysia border. It's radical jihadi country. So the town itself has about 140 child brothels in it, and there is nothing else of note. They've taken over every store, every bank, every building. It's all brothel. When you go there, there are no hotels that aren't brothels. So when I'm staying there, I'm staying in a hotel. But make no mistake, I walk out into the hallway and there are Asian men with their arms up in the doorways and 2 13-year-olds tucked into their armpit, and all they've got on is a hand towel wrapped around their waist, and they're smoking cigarettes and talking to their buddy across the hall, who's also paid for the privilege of raping 2 12-year-olds. But across the river are radical jihadi terror training camps for radical Islamic overthrows, like the ones you see in the Mideast. And they've got to keep their bombing skills sharp. And the way they do that is they bomb the hell out of the brothels. So the first year I was working in this town, and you can see, turn the camera a little bit, the girl you see up there with her face blurred out, she was one of the girls that we were talking to in one of the brothels, who was stuck in the brothel. But between, I think, that trip and the next time, the hotel that I was in, that you see that, area taken, the photo taken in, it was bombed. 330 bombs went off the first year I was in that town. It was basically one a day. So as if the girls don't have enough to worry about by being stuck in the brothel, now they're being bombed by jihadi terrorists. So it is a far cry from the type of trafficking you see in America. But don't think for a second, if you're living in Podunk, Nebraska, or Medford, Oregon, or even New York City or Tampa, that your town is safe. If you have any hotel or motel in your town, you have trafficking going on.
It's funny, I remember reading a book by Dr. Judith Reisman called Kinsey, Sex, and Fraud. I read it a long time ago. And in the book, she documents that Kinsey claimed that he could document orgasms in babies. And he was hiring criminals to to molest these babies and actually had charts of the orgasms. And these were babies that are several months old. And his proof that they had an orgasm was that they were screaming. The babies were screaming out. Well, I don't know if that's proof of anything. And yet Kinsey is considered a god.
Oh yeah.
But I remember when the movie came out with Liam Neeson, and these idiots were coming out of the theater, and I stood in front of the theater with my wife, and because I certainly wouldn't go see that movie, but I would accost the people coming out of it. And my wife was trying to get me to stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Well, I'm incorrigible. And so I went after these women because they were saying when they came out of the movie, oh, if it wasn't for Kinsey, we could never have enjoyed sex. This is what these idiots were saying. And could you give us, let's say, a case study of how a child goes from being with his family or her family and the process that the child becomes a sex slave? What is a normal pattern?
It's very different depending on region. So when my the nonprofit that I started working for in 2013, one of the things they hired me to do was to open their Southeast Asia office. And they had been primarily active in Europe, in Greece, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Norway. And when you rescue a girl from sex slavery in that part of the world, you're rescuing a late teen, usually 16, 18-year-old girl. And when you interview them after rescuing them, you say, did you know that you were going to be working in a brothel? And they go, no, I didn't know I was going to be working in a brothel. A recruiter came to my town. We're from the Ukraine or poor Roma gypsy territory, like my ancestry, some poor part of Europe. And they promised my family money, and I was supposed to be a waitress in a cocktail bar. I was supposed to be a maid in a high-end hotel, and I was dying to help my family, and we're poor, and it was all unicorns and rainbows what they promised me. But somewhere after they leave their town, they're drugged, their paperwork and passport are stolen, and they wake up chained to a bed in a brothel known as a breaking house, which is exactly what it sounds like. The girls are raped over and over and over again until they're sufficiently apathetic that they can be trusted to be left alone with a John. And sometimes that will include being raped by a customer that looks like a cop or a sympathetic person, where the girl's like, oh, this is, maybe I could talk him into helping me escape, only to find that he's a Confederate of her hostage keeper, and so the point is, the girl's really brainwashed, and by the time the breaking has occurred, she's learned she can't trust anybody, even guys who are supposed to help, like people in uniform or people who seem sympathetic. And then and only then is she allowed to be alone in a room with a customer, right? So that they know she won't try to place a call for help with the guy's cell phone or whatever. But when these girls escape, they jump out a window, they, despite being brainwashed, see a frat boy who maybe was coerced on a backpacking trip after high school or college by his buddies to go into this brothel in Greece or Amsterdam. And she senses that he's not really down with the program and says, hey, can I place a call for help on your phone? And we rescue her and we ask her, did you know what you would be doing? She's like, hell to the no. I thought I was going to be a waitress. It's a total bait and switch. That is what you see in many first world type areas, right? In Asia, the situation is very, very different. The parents sell their children to the brothels. But before you demonize the parents, let me tell you a little story. So it was fall of 2013, almost 10 years ago to the day. And we had taken a Christian film crew into the brothel that we were working in to document the difference between the Asian sex slave context and what I just described. And there was a 12-year-old girl, the only one in the brothel, who had bravely agreed to be interviewed by us. And the mama-san had signed off and allowed her to take a couple minutes away from her clients to do so. And she walks into the room, and we had set her chair against the window with the drape a certain way to shade her face and shadow it appropriately and fuzz it out. And she was wearing a sort of a peach chiffon party dress, kind of like a cotillion dress. Very sweet girl, sitting there with her hands quietly clasped in her lap. And we asked, "Did you know when you got here what you would be doing?" And she looks at the camera and she says, "I knew exactly what I would be doing, but I'm not unhappy." And my colleague from London leans over and he goes, "Lee, the translation must have been bad. Nobody is happy to be in a brothel. Let's ask it again." So we ask it again. "Did you know when you got here what you'd be doing?" And for the second time in as many minutes, she said, "Yes, I knew exactly what I would be doing, and I'm not unhappy because my 7 brothers and sisters have food on the table and they're not starving to death, nor is my mother."
Wow.
And if you had asked me before that, "Do you think it's wrong to sell your eldest daughter to a brothel?" you and me and all of your listeners would have probably had only one response to that question. But I ask you, now that I've given you that data, is it any more or less wrong to not sell your daughter to an eldest brothel so that all of your children and you can starve to death in the next month? Is that a better, higher, more good end to that equation? And you rapidly realize that that's not the question you need to be asking. You need to be asking, how in the hell do you get so poor that as a parent, your only damn options are watching your children starve or selling one of them to the brothel to try to save you for another year? And the answer to that is communism. Every single country I'm working in over there is communist or was communist. That is how you get that poor. Back to America. How do the children in America get sex trafficked? They're orphans, they're runaway youth, they're foster kids. They were already sexually abused by somebody that they loved or trusted, their scoutmaster, their priest, their religious, figure, or their parent or their uncle, and they have a history of that. And so they're easy pickings, as it were, because they're low self-esteem. They've already been groomed by somebody else. They're not comfortable saying no, right? So they're easy pickings for the pimp to come along at age 12 or 13 and make his move. And in many cases, the pimp is a step up for these girls. The pimp will say, "I love you." And the girl's never heard that before from her dad who was raping her. Or he's giving her a couple meals a day, and maybe she was straight out starving into her abusive home. So you get a very Stockholm syndrome sort of bonding between these girls, but a lot of them were at-risk youth. But just because you're living in upper middle class America with a white husband and 2.3 children and picket fence, don't for a single solitary second think that your child can't be sex trafficked. There's a couple different types of sex trafficking recruitment. There's guerrilla kidnapping, like you saw with Taken, like you're afraid of happening with your son or your grandson. And that's where a white van pulls up, panel van pulls up, and you're getting back in the car at the park, and they reach over and grab your kid and run away, and your kid's been kidnapped and is now being sex trafficked. And that's every parent's worst nightmare. And that's what Hollywood, makes movies about. So everybody knows about that and knows to teach their children to take a wide berth from panel vans and people offering free candy and cute puppy petting. The other more insidious ways it happens are you get a young looking guy to enroll in high school. And he's probably 22, but he looks like he's 16, and he enrolls as a junior, and he starts dating your daughter. And he's a good looking kid, and he's white, and he's, got very little facial hair, and he's clean cut, and he's well spoken, and they become boyfriend, girlfriend, your daughter and this guy. And every day for 3 months, he comes and takes her to volleyball practice and helps her study for her AP exams and says, "Yes, sir," and looks you in the eye and shakes your hand and gets her home in time for curfew at 10 o'clock. And then a few months in, when they're duly and truly in love, he says something to her like, "Hey, baby, when my family was having hard times a few months ago and my buddy loaned me money and I told him I'd pay it off. Well, the loan is due and I still don't have all the money together, but he told me yesterday that if you just get with him, he'll erase the debt." And she goes, "But baby, I love you. I don't want to get, what are you talking about? I love you. I want to be with you. I don't want to get with him. What? No." But he works on her, works on her, works. So it's just this one time. And then you and I can ride off into the sunset. He promises her the world on a platter. And she finally says yes. Usually during that time, unbeknownst to her, she's being filmed or photographed, and there are naked or half naked photos of her being recorded. And then the next day or the day after that, he goes, okay, you're going to do it again with a different friend. And she goes, the hell you say? And he goes, yeah, you are. And she goes, no, I ain't. No, I ain't. No, I'm not. And he goes, yeah, you are. Because if you don't, I'm going to take all these photos I took of you getting with my friend and send them to your pastor and your mother's accounting firm, you know, that she works at, and your dad's law firm. And I'm going to make damn sure everybody in the high school sees it. And at that point, the girl goes, okay. And he starts taking her on dates, dropping her off at 10 o'clock. Thank you so much, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And after you guys go to bed, he comes back at 11 or 12. She crawls out her bedroom window, and he goes and sells her at a hotel room or on the street for another 3 or 4 hours, drops her back at 4 in the morning so she can get 2 or 3 hours of sleep before school. And you now have a kid who's losing weight, grades are dropping, won't talk to you, and you don't know why. She was sextorted. It's called sextortion, and she was Romeo pimped. She wasn't gorilla pimped. She was Romeo pimped by a guy who looked like a great boyfriend, but was actually at the kid's high school recruiting. And you never saw it coming because you're living in a really nice $1 million and up neighborhood, and your kid was being recruited for D1 volleyball teams and had a straight A GPA. And we have rescued children like that.
How many kids are literally, as they show in the film, but that's in South America, how many kids are literally just grabbed, whether it's in a village market or whether it's in a supermarket or a store? How common is that? And what would you advise parents to make sure that that can't happen?
It's probably the minority of what we're seeing in America. The more common stuff is they're recruited in high school, like I just described, or they're in college, and you know, a modeling or acting company comes along, and the girl knows because you warned her. You said, don't go on the casting couch. You're pretty, but you know, go work as a waitress. Stay away from the modeling acting companies. And she'll say, no, no, no. And the guy will go, look, I'm legit. I have a storefront. I'll do your headshots for free. This isn't, you know, you can check me out. This is my wife. And they keep showing up at college parties. And the girl finally says yes. And she gets sent out for legit music videos, legit modeling work, legit headshots she didn't have to pay for. And guess what? She signed a W-2 or W-9. A few months in, the guy goes, you're going to go in the back room of this party, and instead of doing modeling, you're going to service my friends. And again, she says, no, I'm not. And he goes, yes, you are, because if you don't, I have your mommy's home address on your W-2 you filled out, and we'll show up and kill them in their sleep. So the sextortion, the description I just gave you, the modeling recruitment, the high school recruitment, those are the majority of what we see happening in America, or the runaways who are picked up. I mean, if your kid ends up on the street, either because they're pissed at you and they, even though you have an otherwise good relationship, they go out on the street, your clock is running. You got 48 hours. I think the rule is something like 50% of girls are approached, or maybe it's closer to 100%. I forget now, but a huge percentage of kids who are on the street will be approached by sex traffickers within the first 2 days. You are on the clock. So even though the taken, you know, the gorilla pimping, the panel van is the minority of it, it's certainly the scary thing. And I will say it's on the rise. In Orange County here, we've seen attempted kidnappings at malls with white panel vans in the last year. You got to tell your kids, and you don't need to make it scary, but you do need to explain, hey, they got a free lollipop, a free ice cream, a cute puppy. You don't know them. Stranger danger. All the same rules apply. The stuff we learned in the 70s. And give a wide berth to cars and vans, and don't be distracted on your cell phones in parking lots. Don't be walking by yourself down dark alleys. You just cannot be too safe, because that is their product, and it's free product if they can grab it from you. Your child is their ticket to a multi-million-dollar. I mean, these pimps are selling these girls 8-10 times a night for hundreds of dollars each time in many cases, tax-free. They're making tens of thousands of dollars a week, And the ticket to that is their inventory, which is your child.
You mentioned
So,
acting. And of course, we've heard the publicized stories of this animal, Harvey Weinstein, and this other monster, Bill Cosby, who was drugging women.
oh yeah.
Of course, they weren't children, but obviously it's the same low life mentality.
Yep.
Uh, how prevalent is the things that we read that the media labels as quote unquote conspiracy theory? And even with regard to what was called Pizzagate during the Hillary Clinton campaign, how much of that is there at least circumstantial evidence for, and how much of it is nonsense, if any?
The stuff you hear coming out of Hollywood is, in my book, all true. I've had friends who had casting couch issues. I've personally been sexually harassed in jobs in my past, propositioned. That has been going on since time immemorial. The only difference is it's finally breaking into mainstream media news cycles now, and we're starting to get prosecutions. um the Pizzagate, the fact that these things go all the way up to the vested power brokers and power elites and power interests in our society, that is also 100% factual. My husband, it was funny when the Megan's Law came out and you could log on and put your address in and see all these, different, it was like orange, red, and dark purple little pinpoints on a map that would come up and show you if you were living within so many yards or miles of a convicted sex offender, based on whether it was a date rape guy or like a Ted Bundy, axe murder you after he raped you kind of guy. It was a great search tool. And it was probably the early 2000s, early aughts. My husband was like, we were maybe just having a baby or had a young kid at the time. We put our address in, and we live near a freeway, not really near a freeway. It's maybe 10 miles away. But the freeway sort of divides, on the other side of the freeway, it's not as nice an area. On this side of the freeway, it's a nicer area up in the foothills. And we put our address in, and you get all these red, I mean, it's just, red little red bubbles everywhere on the other side of the freeway. And there's a couple on our side of the freeway, and then as you get up into the foothills, there's no red bubbles at all. And my husband looks at the map and he goes, "Oh, praise Jesus, thank God." He goes, we're living in a good area. And I looked at him and I just laughed. And he goes, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "Oh, honey, the fact that there's no red dots in our neighborhood doesn't mean that there's not rape and sex trafficking going on. It just means that it's being done by cops and lawyers and prosecutors and judges. And baby, they don't arrest themselves." The lack of red dots does not mean it's not frickin' happening. It means it's not getting caught and prosecuted and making front page news. But make no frickin' mistake at all, it is still happening. And it is, and it has been. And when you work in the field, we took possession of a laptop that came from a woman who was getting divorced, and her soon to be ex-husband was living in a foreign country. And he was a really rich and powerful guy. Really rich and powerful guy. Like if I said who the person was, everybody would know. And their 8th grade son had gone to spend a month over the summer with dad. And dad, being an idiot, right? Like the bank robber who leaves his ID at the scene of the crime, dad had given his old laptop to his tech savvy son and not wiped it first. So the tech savvy kid, be careful when you let your kids on your toys, folks. They're a lot better at fishing through your stuff than you are, I guarantee it, for the most part. So the kid logs on and starts cruising around this laptop and stumbles into a crazy nest of sex trafficking evidence, barcoding of women that were being moved worldwide in sex slavery rings, and very high level, I mean, like tagging and moving as if you were, Amazon moving a tangible good that wasn't a human being. And the kid was like, what the hey? Turned the laptop over to mom, who was like, what the what? And eventually the laptop found its way to us. But yeah,
Well,
it's
just to,
everywhere.
just to give you a quick story, and we're talking to Lee Dundas, and she's the author of Just Stand Up, and she's devoted her life to helping children and families who are put into sex slavery, whether it's from creeps like Epstein or Weinstein, what have you. Just a quick story. My wife calls me the Swami because I can look at somebody and I already know what they are. So I go to a Rotary Club meeting. The Rotary Club. In those days, it was all men. Now there's women also. And the president of the Rotary Club, who's what the Jews would call a big macha, a big shot.
Yep.
This animal is being idolized by all these people in the Rotary Club. And I start to listen to him talk about his background. And he is the president of the Boys Club of Flushing. He is a Catholic big brother. And he doesn't appear to have a girlfriend. He's a kind of a good-looking macho guy. He's not effeminate in any way. And I turn to my friend and I say, John, this guy is a freaking pedophile.
Yep.
And my friend says, Bob, shut up. You can't say that. I said, I'm telling you, there's something wrong here. Then they announce that these idiot attorneys, which is usually a redundant phrase,
Agreed.
these idiots are pro bono representing him in adopting a 13-year-old boy. And I flicked and I said, my God, what is he doing adopting a adolescent boy?
Right.
This is sick.
Yeah.
Well, I get a phone call from John German, who had never called me in his life. I wasn't his friend. He said, Bob, I've been watching you, and you are the most dynamic attorney I've ever seen. And if anybody could help me, it's you. And I said, really? Help you with what? He says, well, I'm in the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is in Manhattan. And it's an FBI operation. And I knew immediately this guy is doing sex trafficking. It turns out that this low animal, was taking these kids across state lines into New Jersey.
Wow.
And selling them to these beasts over there.
Wow.
But the story ends on a happy note. And by the way, the judge in the case sentenced him to giving speeches to little boys on the dangers of pedophilia. The judge was a weirdo himself.
Yep.
And the only good news is he called me again, this idiot, from the jail, John Gotti, the head of the mafia, who was there also, had his guys beat the crap out of him.
Nice.
And he thought he was going to get sympathy from me.
Oh,
and I was like, well, they didn't do enough. You're still breathing.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
By the way, on your right shoulder, it looks like you've got General Flynn, and then it looks like you have the author of Hillbilly Elegy on your left side over there. Am I right?
I've got Pastor Jackson Lawmeyer out of Oklahoma, who was running for U.S. Senate, and General Flynn on that shot. And then that's Clay Clark on the bottom one. Yeah.
Okay. So. It's very dull. It looked to me like he was that congressman who the movie Hillbilly Elegy was about.
No, just a pastor. So.
What church is that?
I forget the name of his church, but he is amazing. I spoke with him a couple of times to his congregants out there. Just really good. Kept his church open right through the pandemic. Gotta love him. Flynn was backing him for the Senate race, but they elected another rhino over him, unfortunately. But
What
uh,
else?
guy is good. Yeah, I know. We got a lot of work to do in America to get back away from the communist overthrow we're in the midst of.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
more people waking up.
how can people keep up with your work? Obviously, everyone should get the book, grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, what have you, because you got to
Yes.
protect your kids.
You do. And I tried to write it interweaving some funny stories from my youth and earlier practice of law years so that it wasn't all just, make you want to cry stuff. And I in every chapter, regardless of whether it was brothel related or not, I really tried to draw out the tangible takeaway lesson so that if you've not had to go fight, against the mafia in jihadi country, you could just learn from my mistakes and my takeaways, as it were. But the notion is really to just stand up to tyranny wherever it may find you. And if people want to keep up with me, they can go to my website. It's leighdundas.com. That's LEIGHDUNDAS.com. My nonprofit website, where you can see some of the work I've been doing over the last 3 years here in America to try to keep us out of the communist soup, is also it gives an opportunity to buy the book. The book is available from both websites. freedomfighternation.org is the name of my nonprofit website. Again, freedomfighternation.org. Both of those will have a pop-up screen where you can buy the book. If you can get it this week, that would be great. I've never done the author thing before, but I'm given to understand if enough people buy your book in a week, you kind of make the bestseller list, and that's always exciting. And as well, I spent an extra, I don't know, $5 on printing to really give folks a bird's eye image into child brothels. There's 20 pages of color photos in the middle that they can buy. And that's a literal look at a back room of a child brothel in Asia with the teddy bears lining the walls. The only witnesses really to what goes on there besides the Johns who buy the girls and the girls themselves. So again, not something you see in a lot of other books. And my daughter, who's 18, I told her, hey, I gave you an acknowledgement. You should read it on her way into a manicure appointment. She came out and I said, did you read it? I gave you props, babe. And she goes, oh, no, I didn't look at the acknowledgement section, Mom. I just started on chapter 1. You're really funny. I was laughing so hard. My manicurist had to tell me to put the book down so my little fingers weren't shaking. And she goes, I had no idea how funny you were. And kids, they don't give you praise ever, not when they're 18 years old. So General Flynn called it a tour de force, and even my daughter seemed to like it. So hopefully you'll enjoy it as well. Again, leighdundas.com. That's where you can find me, follow me, and buy the book. And I'd be honored if they
The
did.
book is called Just Stand Up by
Yep.
Leigh Dundas. And all you parents out there, you better get off that Egyptian river denial and start waking up to what we're facing. It's not
Yep.
pleasant, but it's the truth. And the truth will set you free, as somebody once said.
100%.
You take care.
You too, my friend. Take
All right.
care, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure.